My husband thought he could publicly replace me and steal my empire, but he had no idea I was the one leading the internal check into his secret organized scheme. While he paraded his mistress, I was finalizing the heavy accusation that would send him away for dozens of years. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the heavy silk of my midnight blue gown. For 10 years, I had been the silent engine behind Mark's success. When we met, he was a struggling consultant with more debt than dreams. I used my family's trust, my father's old business contacts, and my own sleepless nights to turn his name into a global brand. But to Mark, I was just Elena, the dutiful wife who stayed home and managed the household. He thought he had outgrown me. He thought the empire he sat upon was built by his hands alone, forgetting whose signature was actually on the founding documents. Tonight was the annual Excellence Gala. Mark had been acting strange for months. Late nights, business trips to the coast, and a sudden, sharp cruelty in his voice whenever he spoke to me. I knew what was coming. I'd seen the credit card statements for jewelry I never received. I'd heard the whispered calls in the middle of the night. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just made a few phone calls of my own and waited for the right moment to let the curtain fall. When we arrived at the venue, Mark didn't even offer me his arm. He walked 3 paces ahead of me, his chest puffed out like a peacock. He was the man of the hour, or so he believed. As we entered the grand ballroom, the whispers started immediately. I saw his eyes searching the crowd, not for investors, but for someone specific. And there she was, Chloe. She was 24, dripping in diamonds that my money had paid for, wearing a dress that was 2 sizes too small and 3 shades too loud. Mark didn't even hesitate. In the middle of the room, under the glow of 1,000 crystal chandelier, he walked straight to her and took her hand. The room went silent. The city's elite, the people I had cultivated relationships with for a decade, stared in shock. Mark turned back to me, a smirk playing on his lips. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a public execution of my dignity. "Elena," he said, his voice loud enough to carry to the back of the hall. "I think it's time we stopped pretending. This is Chloe. She's the woman who actually appreciates the heights I've reached. My lawyer has the papers. You can keep the house in the suburbs, but the company, the accounts, and this life, they belong to me and the woman who supports my vision." Chloe giggled, clinging to his arm like a trophy. I saw the pity in the eyes of the women around us. I saw the smug satisfaction in the eyes of the men who always thought I was just a +1. Mark expected me to break. He expected a scene, a tearful exit, something that would prove I was unstable and justify his choice. Instead, I smoothed my dress and checked my watch. "Are you done, Mark?" I asked calmly. "Done? I'm just getting started," he sneered. "Security will escort you out if you don't leave on your own. You don't belong here anymore. This is a VIP event. You're just a shadow." At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. A hush fell over the room that was far heavier than the one Mark had created. The security detail stepped aside, bowing their heads. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The arrival of the evening's guest of honor, the man who held the keys to the city's infrastructure, and the contracts Mark had been praying to sign for years. Julian Thorne stepped into the light. He was a titan of industry, a man whose name was spoken in whispers in the halls of power. Mark's eyes widened. He practically threw Chloe's hand off his arm in his haste to straighten his tie. He thought this was his moment to seal the deal of a lifetime. Mark stepped forward, his hand outstretched, a practiced, oily smile on his face. "Mr. Thorne, what an honor. I'm Mark Sterling. We spoke about the—" Julian Thorne didn't even look at him. He didn't even break his stride. He walked right past Mark's outstretched hand, his eyes locked on a target. Mark froze, his hand hanging in midair, his face turning a deep, embarrassed red. Julian stopped directly in front of me. To the collective gasp of everyone in the room, the most powerful man in the state didn't just nod. He took my hand and pressed a respectful kiss to my knuckles. "You're late, boss," Julian whispered, though in the silence of the room his voice rang like a bell. "The board has been waiting for your signal to initiate the internal check on the Sterling accounts. We found the organized scheme you suspected. It's much worse than we thought." Mark's jaw dropped so low I thought it might hit the marble floor. He looked at me, then at Julian, then back at me. His face went from arrogant to ghostly pale in 3 seconds. He realized then that Julian Thorne didn't work with him. He worked for me. "Boss?" Mark stammered, his voice cracking. "Elena, what is he talking about?" I looked him dead in the eye, my expression cold as ice. "I didn't just build your company, Mark. I own the land it sits on, the debt it carries, and the man you just tried to impress. And Julian is right. We found the missing funds. We found the illegal transfers you made to Chloe's offshore accounts." Just as Mark opened his mouth to lie, the main doors opened again and 4 men in dark suits stepped in. The internal security team I had hired to finalize the investigation. They weren't there for the party. They were there for him. The silence in the ballroom was so thick you could hear the frantic ticking of Mark's expensive watch. He looked at me, then at Julian Thorne, the man he had spent 3 years trying to even get a meeting with, and then at the security team, closing in. The arrogance that had defined his face for the last decade was melting away, replaced by a raw, ugly terror. Chloe, sensing the shift in the wind, slowly began to unhook her arm from his, her eyes darting toward the exit. "Elena, wait!" Mark stammered, his voice losing its edge. "This is just a misunderstanding. The money, it was for a high-yield investment. I was going to surprise you. Julian, you know how business is. You move things around to make them grow." Julian didn't even blink. He leaned in closer to Mark, his presence dwarfing him. "I know exactly how your kind of business works, Mark. You didn't move money to grow it. You moved it to hide it. We've been tracking the flow for 6 months. Every penny you siphoned from the main accounts into those shell companies has been logged. You didn't just commit fraud. You involved the firm in an organized scheme that touches some very dark corners of the market." Mark's face went from pale to gray. The words "organized scheme" echoed through the room, and the guests began to back away as if he were suddenly contagious. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was a demolition. "You have no proof," Mark hissed, though his eyes were wild. "I am the CEO. I have the right to authorize—" "You were the CEO," I interrupted, stepping forward until I was inches from him. I pulled a small, sleek folder from my clutch and held it up. "As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the board held an emergency meeting. Using my majority stake, the one you thought I'd signed over to you 3 years ago, we voted to terminate your contract with cause. You are no longer an employee, let alone an officer of this company. You are a trespasser." I looked over at the head of the security team. "Please escort Mr. Sterling and his associate off the premises. If they resist, call the local authorities. We have the full dossier of the forbidden substances he's been importing through the shipping lanes to fund his lifestyle. I'm sure the internal check will want to see those manifests." Chloe let out a small shriek. "Substances? Mark, you said it was just consulting. You said she was a nobody who wouldn't notice." She turned to me, her face a mask of fake innocence. "I didn't know, Elena. I swear I thought he was divorced already. "Save it for the lawyers, Chloe," I said, my voice as cold as the champagne. Though, considering the accounts I just froze were the ones paying for that dress, I'd suggest you find a very cheap one. As the security guards moved to grab Mark's arms, he suddenly snapped. He lunged forward, not at me, but at the table where my phone was sitting. Julian moved faster, blocking him with a solid shoulder, but Mark didn't stop. He was shouting now, a vein pulsing in his forehead. "You think you've won?" Mark screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "You think you can just erase me? I know where the bodies are buried, Elena. I know about the 2019 expansion. If I'm going down for an organized scheme, you're coming with me. I have the recordings from the internal meetings. I have proof that the heavy accusations you're throwing at me were actually your idea." He stopped, a manic grin spreading across his face as he realized he still had one card to play. He looked at the crowd, at the cameras, and then back at me. "She's not the victim," he yelled to the room. "She's the architect. Every illegal move, every packet of prohibited substance moved through our ports. It was all her. I have the encrypted files on a drive that will be released the second I'm processed. You want to talk about a life-shattering term? We'll be sharing a cell block." The room plunged into a new kind of silence, a shocked, horrified stillness. Julian looked at me, a flicker of concern finally crossing his face. Mark was laughing now, a hollow, broken sound. He thought he had me. He thought he had finally found the one thing I couldn't control. I waited for the laughter to die down. I waited until every eye in the room was burning into mine. Then I pulled a second, smaller device from my bag, a remote trigger for the ballroom's main projection screen. "I was hoping you'd mention those files, Mark," I said softly, "because I've been waiting for a reason to show everyone what's actually on that drive." I clicked the button, and the massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. But it wasn't business spreadsheets that appeared. It was a video, clear as day, of Mark in a dark office, talking to a man whose face was blurred, discussing a way to frame me for the very crimes he was now shouting about. Mark's laughter died in his throat. He stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. But as the video played, something went wrong. The screen didn't just show the office. It shifted to a live feed from our home, a feed of a room I had never seen before, hidden behind the library wall. Inside that room were crates marked with government seals and a man standing over them, holding a piece of paper with my forged signature. My heart stopped. This wasn't my video. Someone had hacked the feed. The man on the screen looked directly into the camera, pulled a radio from his belt, and said, "The target is in position. Proceed with the heavy accusation protocol. Arrest everyone." Before I could even process what was happening, the lights in the ballroom cut to black, and the sound of heavy boots shattered the windows. The glass didn't just break, it exploded inward as tactical teams in matte black gear swarmed through the shattered windows, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like frantic searchlights. Screams echoed off the marble walls as the socialites scrambled for cover, diving under tables draped in white linen. In the chaos, I felt a hand grab my arm. It was Mark. Even in the shadows, I could see the manic glint in his eyes. "This is it, Elena," he hissed, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and triumph. "The internal check is here for those crates. I made sure your name was on every manifest of those prohibited substances. You're going away for a huge term, and I'm the state's star witness." Suddenly, the ballroom lights flickered and surged back to life with a blinding hum. The tactical teams didn't move toward me. They didn't move toward the VIPs. They formed a tight, impenetrable perimeter around Mark and Chloe. Mark's grip on my arm slackened as he looked at the men surrounding him, their weapons lowered, but their intent clear. Standing at the front of the squad was a man I recognized immediately. Agent Miller, the head of the internal check department I had been feeding information to for the last 6 months. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight at me and gave a sharp, professional nod. "Wait!" Mark screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's the one. You saw the screen. You saw the hidden room and the signed documents. Arrest her." Agent Miller stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy-duty restraints from his belt. "We saw the video, Mr. Sterling. We also saw the metadata. You see, when someone uses a digital signature authorized for boss-level access, it triggers a silent GPS and biometric log. That signature you forged on those manifests wasn't Elena's. It was a honeypot trap she set 3 months ago. Every time you used it to move those prohibited substances, you were essentially signing your own confession and sending us your exact coordinates." The blood drained from Mark's face until he looked like a marble statue. He turned toward the screen, which was now scrolling through a list of every single time he had accessed the hidden vault. Beside each entry was a high-definition photo taken by the vault's hidden camera. Photos of Mark, and only Mark, loading the crates. And as for the heavy accusations of an organized scheme, Julian Thorne added, stepping into the light beside me, "Did you really think I'd let a man like you anywhere near my infrastructure? Every meeting we had was a deposition in disguise. Every contract you thought you were negotiating was actually a detailed list of your own financial crimes, which you so helpfully initialed." Chloe let out a sob, collapsing to her knees as the reality of the situation hit her. "I was just the girlfriend. I didn't know about the substances. I just wanted the money." "The money you spent was stolen from a pension fund for our employees," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics like a blade. "Which makes you an accessory to an organized scheme. You can explain your ignorance to the investigators who will be dismantling your life piece by piece." Mark tried to bolt, a desperate, clumsy lunge toward the kitchen service doors, but the team was faster. They tackled him to the ground, the sound of his face hitting the marble echoing through the silent room. As they hauled him up, his expensive suit was torn, his hair was a mess, and the mask of the powerful CEO had finally irrevocably shattered. "Elena!" he yelled as they dragged him toward the exit. "Elena, please, we can fix this. Think about the years we spent together. You can't let them take me." I didn't answer. I didn't even look at him. I turned my back as the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, marking the end of his freedom and the beginning of his decades-long sentence for the crimes he tried to pin on me. The ballroom was silent now, the guests standing in shock, their eyes fixed on me. I looked at the broken glass, the spilled champagne, and the ruined gala. Julian Thorne stepped toward me, offering a fresh glass of vintage wine. "A bit more dramatic than we planned, wouldn't you say?" Julian asked with a faint smile. I took the glass, the cold crystal firm in my hand. "It was exactly what it needed to be, Julian. The world needed to see who was really holding the reins." I walked to the center of the room, standing under the massive chandelier that still glittered despite the chaos. I raised my glass to the crowd, the investors, the politicians, and the rivals who had once looked down on me as just the wife. "The gala is over," I announced, my voice steady and commanding. "But Sterling Global is under new management. Tomorrow morning we begin the audit. If you've stayed loyal, you have nothing to fear. If you were part of Mark's organized scheme, I suggest you spend the night finding a very good lawyer. You're going to need one." As the guests began to filter out, talking in hushed, terrified tones, I looked out the window at the city lights. Mark was gone. The weights were off my shoulders, and for the first time in 10 years, the Empire didn't just have my name on the papers. It had my soul in the driver's seat. I had been the shadow for long enough. It was time to be the sun.